Life is one of the most fascinating and complex words in human history because its definition is so vague yet all-encompassing for humans like us. We have a tendency to find meaning and life in anyone and everything we see, especially those of us who have a tendency to be literary. To writers, a ball can be as alive as a human, but that's just personification. What if the Earth is more than just a ball of rock and water floating in space? What if it's alive? These questions sound like something one might ask after a heavy baking session, but the thing is, they also form the foundation of Isaac Asimov's Foundation series. In this video, we'll be taking a deep dive into the ultimate goal of the series, so spoiler warning of the heaviest kind, because we'll be going right into the stuff that might ruin your Apple TV subscription. Buckle your seatbelts because this is Gaia Explained. Before we get into this explanation though, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. The myth that started it all, the Gaia hypothesis. In Greek mythology, Gaia is the name of the living embodiment of planet Earth. It's said that the trees, their roots, the mud, the deserts, the land masses, and all the living beings are just another aspect of her, and Gaia's existence was integral in giving birth to life. But the Gaia hypothesis isn't myth or science fiction. It's a real scientific hypothesis that's been stirring debates among scientists, ecologists, and philosophers for over 50 years. The Gaia hypothesis was first introduced in the 1970s by British scientist James Lovelock with key contributions from microbiologist Lynn Margulis. At its core, it proposes the idea that life on Earth isn't just a passenger, but an engineer. That organisms don't just adapt to their environment, they also shape it, whether they're organic or inorganic. In simple terms, the Earth functions as a single self-regulating system where life and the environment evolve together in a tightly coupled feedback. Imagine the planet as a giant living cell. The atmosphere is its lungs, the forests are its organs, the oceans its bloodstream, and the living beings are the codependent harvesters of all these things. Life influences the climate, the chemistry, even the stability of this living Earth, which is a concept that's pretty similar to the mythological existence of Gaia. Lovelock later clarified that Gaia isn't a singular concept, it's four ideas merged into one with varying degrees of application depending on how far you want to take it. The first idea was called geophysical Gaia, which operates off of the very baseline assumption that life affects the environment. This is widely accepted because we have significant empirical evidence to support it. We need only look at the massive permanent settlements we've created. Human life has made the environment of Earth significantly more volatile, which is what climate change is. By plowing lands, erecting buildings, inventing cars, and other such things, we've had a massive impact on the global environment, and this is just a fact. The second idea Lovelock proposed was homeostatic Gaia, which operates off the idea that life significantly modifies Earth to make it more habitable for itself. Some scientists support this view, with the general argument that life on Earth started developing when the first microorganisms came into existence. As they spread throughout the planet, their presence affected the climate, making it habitable over the millennia and leading to the birth of multicellular organisms who continue reshaping Earth in many ways. The third idea is called co-evolutionary Gaia, which proposes that Earth is what it is today because of the simultaneous evolution of life and the environment that surrounds it. This too has scientific evidence, for we know that it was the interplay of inorganic and organic elements that made life possible in the first place. And the fourth idea is called optimizing Gaia, which states that Earth is a living being that created a self-sustaining ecosystem for its own goals and purposes so that its overall existence will never be affected. This is the idea that made the entire hypothesis much more controversial than the first three for reasons than you can imagine. But to understand why Lovelock thought this way, we need to take a look at the evidence he presented. Let's start with the atmosphere. At 21%, Earth has a level of oxygen in its atmosphere that's quite dangerous. In fact, just 4% more and it would become explosive. Yet the planet has held steady for hundreds of millions of years, and according to Optimizing Gaia, this is because photosynthetic organisms like plants and cyanobacteria constantly replenish it as living organisms deplete it and contribute carbon dioxide, which is needed by photosynthetic organisms for survival. This feedback loop keeps oxygen levels below combustion, and nitrogen, which is the primary gas in Earth's atmosphere, is a non-flammable one. So, in the absence of 25% oxygen and a fuel source sufficient enough to engulf the entire planet in flames, there's no chance of the atmosphere catching fire. Now, let's move on to the ocean. Rivers pour salt into the sea every year, yet ocean salinity has stayed remarkably stable at around 3.5% for eons. Lovelock argues that life in the oceans plays a role here too, absorbing and storing salt through biological and geological processes, the latter involving non-cellular structures. And then there's the climate. The sun's output has increased by about 30% since life began. By all logic, Earth should have become a scorched wasteland, but it hasn't so far. Somehow, global temperatures have stayed within the narrow window where liquid water and life can exist. Optimizing Gaia doesn't treat this all as a mere coincidence. It says that Earth has been regulating the thermostat all along, using both organic and inorganic elements to keep life, well, alive. To explore this idea, Lovelock created a thought experiment called Daisy World, where he imagined a planet covered in just two kinds of daisies, black and white. Black daisies absorb heat and warm the planet, whereas white daisies reflect light and cool it. As the sun gets hotter, white daisies thrive and cool the planet down, and as it gets colder, black daisies take over to warm it back up. There's no intent here, there's no consciousness involved in the way that we would think of it. It's just a simple feedback loop that ends up regulating temperature because of natural selection. This powerful metaphor for how life could help stabilize a planet by working with it, not against it, is how the Gaia hypothesis first gained traction. Supporters of Gaia pointed to the real-world examples of this kind of regulation, of which there are many. Forests and oceans remove carbon dioxide from the air, microbes in the ocean produce compounds that seed clouds and affect rainfall, soil organisms stabilize nutrient cycles. All of these examples support the idea that life and the environment are co-evolving and constantly shaping each other in a dance as old as the planet itself. But the criticism towards this hypothesis is also strong because it gives simplistic answers in blanket terms and doesn't address many of the details of evidential life, especially with regards to the Daisy World experiment. Evolutionary biologists argue that natural selection works at the level of individual genes in organisms, not entire planets. And if organisms as individuals act in their own self-interest, why would they sacrifice anything to stabilize the climate? That bit of personal commentary aside, the idea of optimizing Gaia has been rejected even by those who have worked their entire lives to prove it. But the influence of the Gaia hypothesis has quietly seeped into mainstream Earth science. Today, scientists study the planet as a complex system of interlocking parts where the atmosphere, biosphere, lithosphere, and hydrosphere all interact with each other in astonishing feedback loops. The field of Earth system science, which looks into those interactions, may not call Earth a living being like Lovelock did, but it does embrace many Gaian principles in its work, which is a big win for this hypothesis. Right about now, you might be wondering why we've spent so much time discussing something whose ultimate posit wasn't even accepted. Well, the reason is simple. One man did accept it. His name was Isaac Asimov. Asimov might have been a sci-fi author, but his passion for the science half of that genre was so strong that he entrenched himself. In fact, the current field of robotics owes its name to his works, and his influence on actual science goes far beyond any other sci-fi authors. That's why his inclusion of the Gaia hypothesis within his own work isn't exactly the surprise you're hoping for. That would be the way in which he does it, because Asimov's Gaia takes Lovelock's optimizing Gaia even further, presents it as the ultimate key to humanity's continued peaceful survival. Now that we've explained where Asimov's Gaia gets its name from, let's talk about what it is and how it came into existence. A planet that represents the pinnacle of life, Gaia, the living planet. While Asimov never explicitly references the Gaia hypothesis by name in his Foundation series, he very clearly integrates his core ideas into it, especially in the later books of his saga, after he merged the Foundation universe with his Robot series. The most direct connection between the Gaia hypothesis and Foundation appears in the novel Foundation's Edge and continues into Foundation and Earth, where the true puppet master of the series is revealed. In these books, Asimov introduces a mysterious planet which functions as a living superorganism, a literal embodiment of the Gaia hypothesis. That planet is called Gaia, of course, and in the novel Foundation's Edge, the protagonist's discovery of it raises more questions than answers. Gaia was a world that was located very much within the reach of the Galactic Empire, and yet it had, for some reason, evaded the Empire's grasp. It was allowed to evade taxes indefinitely, and it developed in the blind spot of the galactic eye. When the protagonists of Foundation's Edge and Foundation and Earth discovered it, they were shocked to find a world where every element, be it animal, human, plant, or even inanimate matter like rocks and air, was part of a unified conscious mind. All life and matter on Gaia share one collective consciousness, like a hive mind, which gave it and its residents a uniform planetary identity. Gaia self-regulates and maintains internal harmony through instinctive cooperation between all parts of the system. The environment and the life forms it supports are not separate from each other, but part of a holistic, co-evolving network with an unparalleled feedback and regulation system. When one part of the planet is threatened, the whole system responds in unison because they're all connected through this thing called the mind. If that sounds familiar to you, then you aren't mistaken, because Asimov's Gaia is a near-perfect fictional manifestation of the Gaia hypothesis itself. To get into the lore of it all, Gaia was conceived by the true guide of the Foundation series, R. Daniil Olivaw, aka Edo Demerzel. When you get real deep into the novels, especially after Asimov merges Foundation with the Robot series, you start seeing the only person whose impact on both franchises has been godlike. Daniil started off life as a human detective sidekick, but over the course of his close to 20,000-year life, he became much more than that. It was Daniil who actually helped begin the discipline that would later evolve into psychohistory thanks to the efforts of Harry Seldon. But the Seldon plan and the two foundations were always meant to be a backup. In truth, Daniil's idea went beyond the scope of trying to predict the future by analyzing and predicting humanity's responses as a collective. He wanted to turn humanity itself into a collective. Through his experiences with humans, Daniil came to believe that individuality was one of the crutches that was holding back mankind from reaching its full potential for peace, evolution, and coexistence. Ideals might outlive a man, but differences do the same thing. He felt that only by erasing individual differences could true unity be achieved, so he put into motion a plan to achieve said unity. Though he didn't start off life as a mentalic robot, he eventually became one, and when he received those powers, he realized the massive impact they could have upon the human species. So, over the centuries, especially during the Galactic Era, Daniil quietly began the process of settling Gaia with a human population and bestowing that population with his near-miraculous power. A mentalic's ability to infiltrate, influence, and control the mind of another creature comes from a concept called cerebroanalysis. When the first mentalic robot was created by accident, it was discovered that this robot had the ability to read and decipher the thoughts of a person by studying the electromagnetic fields that were emitted by their brains. This was cerebroanalysis, the power to precisely interpret the thoughts of another living person or entity. The mentalic robots took it a step further, using their own brainwaves to alter another living entities, and that's how telepathic power is explained in the Foundation franchise. What Daniil did to create Gaia was simple enough, but it had such profound implications for the universe that it was bound to become complicated with time. He introduced this power to read and manipulate brainwaves to the entire population of Gaia, and it triggered a change within them that would help realize his own ideals for humanity. The first step was awakening the minds of every human Daniil settled on the planet. By doing this, he realized he had succeeded in creating a group consciousness. Every single person on Gaia was connected to each other through their minds, and this eliminated the need for information systems. Sure, they lost all knowledge of history prior to becoming a collective consciousness because written records weren't the Galactic Empire's forte, but once the awakening happened, all information was stored directly within the minds of each person in the Gaia Collective. Over time, thanks to the nature of electromagnetic radiation, power of a mentalic affected the entire planet and added inanimate things like rocks and streams to the collective. The amount of data that could be stored within such things was minimal in comparison, and it required more time to complete the extraction. In doing so, Daniil achieved the practical application of the Gaia hypothesis. He created a whole planet that was connected through thoughts alone, and so Gaia became ground zero for Daniil's true plan to achieve unity. After refining their mentalic powers for a long enough time, the residents of Gaia became so sensitized to their collective existence that it made impossible things possible for them. For example, if one of their agents was off-world investigating a matter in a different star system, they could update the collective's databanks almost instantly using hyperspace transference. They also became adept at transconduction, an ability that allowed them to manipulate the very terrain of their home planet. Gaians were able to manipulate the minds of others without needing to look at them, which wasn't the case for the mentalics that preceded them, and by becoming this way, they achieved a harmony that outclassed anything that had ever existed. Daniil's hope was to extend this power to the entire empire so that every human being would eventually become part of one whole being. In doing so, he thought he would achieve the objectives set forth by the laws of robotics, even the Zero Law. But in the end, Daniil knew that his independent actions could backfire on him because ultimately it should have been mankind's choice to exist in a collective state. So before his quote-unquote demise, he created the means to convey his work to a select few people so they could decide if Gaia was viable to implement on a galactic scale. We will discuss this final evolution in a separate video. That's because the creation of that particular thing is left ambiguous by Asimov, and we want to take our time exploring it. However, Gaia was created by him, and in terms of the purpose he had created it for, it was a resounding success. A whole planet whose organic and inorganic elements worked in tandem to continue preserving life. That was the motivation behind Daniil's creation of Gaia, and in that at least, he was successful. So now that we've addressed Asimov's demonstration of the practicality of Lovelock's hypothesis, let's look at why he took this direction, because it brings with it several interesting questions about individuality and free will. Why create Gaia the living planet? Asimov's vision for Foundation's ending. What makes Asimov's take on the Gaia hypothesis unique is that he dramatizes the philosophical implications of it. He asks the question that most writers who tackle hive minds usually do, but in a completely different way. If an entire planet could think, feel, and decide, would that be better than individual freedom? Hive minds are generally depicted as a bad idea in most sci-fi series because they infringe on humanity's precious individuality. So, Asimov uses Gaia's existence to contrast with the Selden Plan, the central conceit of the Foundation series. The Selden Plan is based on mathematical prediction and statistical control, a rigid but non-living system. It makes assumptions about the human condition that are way too generalized, presumptive, and concrete, all things that the individual human being isn't. Psychohistory is a discipline Harry Selden developed after coming up with a few theorems and axioms. No research study can begin without these things, and though Harry was a mathematician, he was a scientific researcher at heart. The theorems of psychohistory were quite broad. Harry believed that his new science would only work if humans were unaware of its full scope, or if they knew, they'd deliberately change their behavior to evade its predictions. He thought that the time period that would suffice for proving its validity would be at least 3 generations long, and his sample size was in the billions, for he wanted to verify the statistical viability of psychohistory on a species-wide scale. A fourth theorem proposed that humans were the only sentient beings in the universe, which brings us to the axioms. The first axiom stated that there would be no fundamental changes in human society over the millennia during which the Selden Plan unfolded, and the second axiom stated that human reactions to stimuli would remain constant. The entire presence of psychohistory was the stagnation of humanity, which Harry believed would continue as his work changed the world, but in doing so, he made a big mistake. He didn't anticipate the human population's capacity for change, and he foolishly assumed that humanity was the only species capable of true sentience. As we've seen in the Foundation TV series with Demerzel's character, robots too are capable of sentience, or she wouldn't have received a vision by visiting the spiral, womb of the mother, as part of her faith in luminism. Psychohistory locks society in a permanent and unchanging state, which is what allowed it to make somewhat accurate predictions. Gaia, on the other hand, was organic, evolving, and self-aware, adapting to events occurring within the universe on a real-time basis. In fact, it was because Selden assumed that humans were the only sentients in the universe, Mule's attack and near victory was even possible. Major spoiler alert, but the Mule is a character who was born on Gaia with the same mentalic powers as the rest of his people. His existence generated the greatest unpredictability in Asimov's books because he was the one thing that Selden couldn't entirely predict. While he was defeated in the end, it didn't put to bed the questions that we've posed in this video, and Gaia itself raises the ultimate philosophical debate in any of Asimov's works. Should humanity remain a collection of individuals prone to chaos and creativity, or should it become part of a harmonious whole, losing individuality but gaining universal peace? Asimov never answers this definitively, in that he never says yes or no about either path being correct. Though his characters ultimately make the choice to become a collective, he himself leaves it as an open question, letting the reader ponder the cost of unity versus the value of freedom. That's because there are merits and flaws in everything that exists in the universe. Asimov wrote these Gaia-centric novels in the early 80s, around the same time James Lovelock was publishing more accessible works like Gaia, A New Look at Life on Earth. While Asimov never explicitly cited Lovelock, the timing, terminology, and themes suggest a clear intellectual influence, or at the very least parallel inspiration. The very fact that his living planet is named Gaia isn't a coincidence. for its environmental and evolutionary themes mirror the hypothesis closely. Asimov, a trained biochemist, was certainly aware of contemporary ecological theories. He knew that what he was talking about was an idea that would be extremely daunting to people, especially those who valued their own lives and placed it above the collective known as humanity. He used Gaia as a narrative tool to explore systems thinking, collective consciousnesses, and the relationship between humanity and its environment, because to him, coexistence is the ultimate answer to the eternal question of how peace can be achieved. While scientific Gaia asks whether Earth can regulate itself like an organism, Asimov's Gaia asks, should Earth become an organism? Because the implications of such a transformation are profound. When a rock can answer a question you've been pondering for 5 decades with a loading time of 5 minutes, it should make you stop and think about your own existence. And that's why Asimov created Gaia and its galactic end goal. He wanted people to ask the question of what individuality truly meant in the face of freedom and social dependency, because as social creatures, we humans desire all 3 of those things. We don't like it when someone tells us what to do, we hate it when someone steals our freedom, and yet, for our friends and loved ones, we risk our ideals and our personal independence because that's what makes us human. Survival is an instinct that all animals possess. What makes mankind so unique is ultimately the fact that it can overcome its survival instinct and do things that don't make logical sense. We love underdog stories because it's clear that underdogs can never possess the strength or skill to outclass the top dog, and yet underdogs find their path to victory not just by being determined and going against survival instinct. They also do it thanks to the support systems they've created. That's what Gaia represents to Asimov, an eternal support system where all living and non-living things retain their personalities to an extent, but are also part of a larger collective aimed at achieving universal peace. And that's the reason he's one of the best sci-fi writers in living memory. Gaia is his ultimate answer to the age-old question of how humans can get over themselves and unite with others so different from they are. And it might not be the correct answer, but at least it forces us to think about what might be, and that is more than enough. Marvelous verdict! And that's it for this one. Let us know your thoughts on Gaia the Living Planet down in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more Foundation content. We'll see you guys real soon with another Foundation video, so until then, stay safe, and really ask yourself if your individuality is worth putting the planet at risk, because that's the question Asimov asks again and again through his landmark of a series. Thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.